very much. I'm a little bit alarmed also at giving a talk on the TEI in front of Julie, who's in fact a former chair of the TEI, and Sid Bowman, who's one of the editors of P5 and one of the two main editors, I think it's fair to say, of P4. These are all people who know a lot more than Ray, who's a former board member, all people who know a lot more than I do about it. But initially, I was going to talk about, when I first got the invitation, I was going to talk about ways that I'm beginning to think we might be able to use parameters to get rid of most of the TEI elements and reduce it down to about 5 or 6. And it was really kind of a cool talk that I wanted to give, and very complicated stuff about content models and things. And then Ray, in the way that he has, said that that was a really excellent idea. Another excellent idea might be to explain to people how the TEI works, since a lot of us, in fact, don't necessarily know. And the more I thought about that, the more I thought, in fact, that's really a good idea, because while there's lots of talks in many classes, including here, about how one can use the TEI, how XML works, how various things about the TEI can be used and to train people, I'm not sure that anybody I've ever heard how the TEI works in terms of how is an element made, where does it come from, how come they won't let you do whatever it is you want to do. So I thought I would talk about that. It tied into a talk I was asked to give earlier today on project management in academic organizations. So I'm going to be talking about what the TEI is and how it works. In that sense, it's a service talk, and so for some of you who are old TEI hands, there'll be absolutely nothing new here. For some people, it may elucidate the organizational structure of the TEI. It's not quite as bad as that sounds. And then for others, it may be an introduction to a word that you keep hearing people say you've got to observe, but to show you what that actually means. It's a little bit hard sometimes when items like this to decide exactly how to approach it, and so I've taken a kind of teaching approach about an organization that many of us have to deal with just being digital humanists. There we go. I'm going to start, as everything always does, with Ronald Reagan. And he's repeated to have said, although like many things about Reagan, it turns out somebody else may have said this earlier, but nevertheless, Reagan is repeated to have said that the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." As somebody...
Excuse me for a second.
Yeah.
I'm from the government, and I'm here to help.
No, it's not that.
Just adjust your mic. Down here it needs to be tweaked a little bit. Sorry. Great. I think we just got slow down so much. Sorry, David. No problem. You're on a roll and I interrupted you.
Like Reagan, I can just start again.
Anymore.
He can't, I can't. Okay. So anyways, Reagan said this, as chair of the TEI, and I'm sure other people who have been involved in TEI on the council, at the board, as editors, we often sometimes feel that this is also true. Oh, it's not getting my strikeout. The 9 most terrifying words in the digital humanities are, "I'm from the TEI, and I'm here to help you." I don't know how often I've been at conferences where people will then say, "Oh, we can't do this at the TEI," or worse, this is where this comes from. Sorry, no offense meant, but, and then they'll talk about a problem with the TEI. There's a kind of love-hate relationship, I think it's fair to say, in people's relationship to the TEI. On the one hand, well, let's talk about hate for a second. In its hate moment, I think what people focus on are the restrictions and the difficulty, the technical detail that sometimes one needs to master, the cultish hairdos that you have to adopt in order to use the TEI, and how it seems to stop you from doing what it is you want to do, which is remediating wonderful text for digital audiences. And so my goal today is, as I said, a bit of a service paper rather than to provide startling insight. I want to talk about how TEI works, not necessarily as a markup language, although I'm going to introduce that, but as a community and as a community service as well. I'm going to discuss, oops, going too fast. I'm going to discuss where the restrictions come from, and also to try and show how they're really not as difficult perhaps as they look. But above all, I want to show that the TEI is really not a monolithic other that we sometimes come to think of it as. That it's some kind of global, digital, and I wasn't quite sure what to say here, copper librarian. I think probably librarian. Some kind of global librarian whose job it is to catch people when they're not doing the right thing and then throw them out of the library for failing to observe the shh sign. So, what is the TEI then? Well, the TEI can mean a couple of things. Like so many things in the digital humanities, I think we sometimes end up doing category errors in things that we talk about. We'll talk about the digital edition, and sometimes we mean the screen, sometimes we mean the computer, sometimes we mean how you process information with the computer, and things can get all mixed up when we do that. Well, the same is true of the TEI. When we talk about the TEI, we can mean two different things. We can mean an XML markup language, one which the TEI modestly claims is suitable for marking up any text in any language from any time, for all time, I believe. Or we can talk about it as an organization, as a consortium of organizations originally, the various humanities computing organizations, the host institutions, and more importantly, and I think increasingly, as an organization of digital scholars who want to do things with text and want to come up with some kind of common way of doing it. I'm going to begin by talking a bit about the markup language. For many people in this room, this will be old hat because you'll understand it quite well. But my experience is sometimes it's useful to have a reminder, and for some of us who perhaps this is our second day being introduced to this kind of thing, it might be useful to show it off a bit. Okay, so the TEI is currently an XML-based markup language, and as such is intended to provide a method for representing features in text so that they can be used by computers. That's what it does. It's a way of capturing and identifying things that humans can see and understand about text, and it can represent them in ways that computers can use. Now, some of this is typographical information, and we can do that, but also Word can recognize it. And I've thrown up here, it's a little bit fuzzy perhaps, but I've thrown up here a page from the Blackwell Encyclopedia of Anglo-Saxon England, I believe. Just cut it straight across the page to show you a couple of things. But as we look at this as readers, there's all sorts of things we can see here. So, one of the things we can see is that this bit over here is a title. It's bold, it's in, well, title-ish anyway, some kind of header or something. It's bold, it's in capital letters. It's not actually a title because it's not on the line by itself, it's maybe some kind of head word, something like that, but we know that that's not the same as the next word like. As we look, we see other things. We can see all these things here are in italics for some reason. They stand out on the page for us. So far, this is the kind of thing that Word can do for us. We can do some other things. We can look and we can see that in yellow is a paragraph, and we know this because it's indented and it ends after a curve with a short line. And we can see that this other thing in pink is somehow different from the paragraph in yellow. It doesn't begin at the left-hand side. If I had a better image, you'd see a slightly different print, slightly smaller print. Doesn't have any sentences in it either, even though it has some periods. By the way, one of the other things, I've used this a lot when I teach the TEI, and in all the times I've used this, one of the things that nobody ever does mark up, I ask people to describe what they see here. Nobody ever says, if you notice in that yellow box, that the line ends at is, have, semicolon, Dumpslain, 2 century old, Welsh old, of, in, centuries, that. Everybody marks that it ends at a curve and it ends at ruler, but nobody ever does the other stuff. So there's certain things we even know to ignore. We know to ignore the line breaks, for example. We also know, now this is starting to get more complicated and things that the text isn't necessarily telling us. We know that these things with stars, some of us know anyway, from an undergraduate class, but they didn't know. These things with stars are somehow cross-references, so links to something else. Anglo-Saxon Chronicles turn purple because I'm laying stuff over. We can also see, did I change it right here? No, just line. Wait a second.